Many Christians assume or have been taught that the King James Version of the Bible is the only authentic translation and that all other translations have questionable backgrounds and agenda. What do we at Simply Christ make of all this? To respond to this, it will be prudent to review how the books that make up the Bible were preserved before the modern era. Before the invention of the printing press in the 16th century, copies of scrolls of books that found their way into the modern Bible could only be reproduced by hand copying. These copies, done in the original Hebrew and Greek languages, are called manuscripts. Churches or wealthy church members paid huge sums to scribes or copyists to take an existing copy of a book of the Bible and manually hand copy it to produce another one. These hand-copied books were then taped or sewn together to form a codex, the predecessor to our modern book. Typically, a codex was then kept in church buildings or by church leaders for use by the congregation. This manual process of hand copying obviously has problems. A scribe can easily make a mistake when copying from the existing book, or can actually insert text that they believe should be there or comments they felt would be helpful to the reader. Now think about it. If this was how copies of books of the Bible were produced, then the best way to know what the original writer of a book wrote was to look for earlier copies of that book, which is more likely to contain less copyist mistakes and insertions. And so, as time went on, Bible scholars and researchers found earlier hand copies of the books of the Bible, which brings us to the translation known as the KJV. An interesting fact that many aren't aware of is that the KJV is actually not the first English translation for the masses. A century earlier, the Tyndale Bible by William Tyndale was the first English translation distributed via the printing press and not hand copying. However, because it was not sanctioned by the authorities of the Church of England, the KJV became more popular than the Tyndale Bible. At the time its translation began in the 17th century, the translators of the KJV only had New Testament manuscripts which dated as recently as the 10th century, a clear 1,000 years after Jesus' death. They did their best with what they had, but we now know that there were many copyist mistakes and insertions in those manuscripts, which ended up in their English translation. With access to older manuscripts now, it only makes sense that the Bible be retranslated to detect and remove the copyist errors and insertions introduced during the copying work of scribe upon scribe. Hence the rise of modern Bible translations like NIV, NRSV, NLT, ESV, which have so many footnotes and sometimes remove whole sentences and even chapters that were wrongly appended to the 10th century manuscripts used in translating the King James Version. Additionally, adopting more modern English terms and phrases can make it easier for everyone to read them. So don't fall for the propaganda against modern translations of the Bible. If you followed our explanation here, you'll readily agree with us that many modern translations are actually more original than the KJV. So which version of the modern Bible translation should you read? The NIV, the NLT, the NRSV, the ESV? Well, choice is good, so it's over to you to make a choice that best enables you to understand what you are reading. Just remember that God did not speak in Victorian English, and neither are you required to. Thanks for joining us. Bye.